have much time.
All right, okay, finally, tell me, what is this other threat?
There's like an 8-foot person beside it, and another one's inside, and it has big eyes and looking at us, and it's still there.
Man attacked by extraterrestrial. Check it out, guys.
A top-secret exchange program between the United States government and planet Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system, aka the planet of the short grays. The project was allegedly created under the administration of President John F. Kennedy after the US government saved the life of an alien, EVA-1, who crash-landed on Earth back in 1947. Entirely grateful and forever indebted to humanity, the alien began working with the US government and teaching them about his home planet, Serpo. When EVA-1 died, he left behind communications technology, which the government then used to eventually get into contact with other Serpo natives. That is when the government made arrangements to send 12 specially trained astronauts to planet Serpo so that they may learn about life outside of our atmosphere. In order to reach Serpo, the 12 astronauts had to travel through a wormhole, after which the majority of them got sick and one unfortunately died of an aneurysm. But of course they kept going and eventually they reached the alien planet. For a decade they studied life on Serpo before returning home and assuming entirely new identities in order to protect the security of the mission. Fair enough, I suppose.
So what are the origins of this Project Serpo tale? Well, like with most conspiracies in the modern age, it started gaining popularity online and took off from there. It all started in 2005 when a series of anonymous emails began circulating among UFO researchers and enthusiasts. These emails, which were allegedly from a retired US government official who remained anonymous, laid out this insane story about an extraterrestrial exchange program. We'll talk more about this anonymous individual later. The Project Serpo story started making the rounds way faster than these types of stories would have back in the day. It was 2005, the internet was still relatively new in the grand scheme of things anyway, and the UFO community was just hungry for new sensational stories. And this one, it's pretty much the definition of sensational.
Remember that alien that I mentioned, EVA-1, that crash landed to Earth in 1947? Yeah, well that was actually the Roswell incident of 1947, and also the first time the US government supposedly made contact with aliens. As many of you are probably already aware, in 1947 an unidentified object crash landed on some farmland in Roswell, New Mexico. When Area 51 was alerted of the incident, they rushed to the scene, collected the object, and released a statement saying that what had come spiraling down to Earth a few nights prior was nothing more than a weather balloon. But then they sent the object out to another base for testing, and another, and another. Why? Well, because it wasn't actually a weather balloon. It was an alien spacecraft containing 6 aliens, 5 of which had died in the crash, and 1 of which came to be known as Extraterrestrial Biological Entity Number 1, or EVA-1. EVA-1 was taken to the Air Force facility in Los Alamos, where he stayed until his death in 1952. During this time, he learned to communicate with the military and told them some pretty interesting things.
Now, if the US government is really working with these alien beings, where might they be carrying out their activities? Area 51? Some hidden base in Antarctica? Well, some say they could be operating from an even more top secret place. Dulce Base. Dulce Base supposedly sits deep beneath the Colorado-New Mexico border, close to Dulce, New Mexico. Dulce Base is said to be a secret facility where humans and aliens are working together, exchanging ideas and doing all sorts of experiments. Multiple levels deep underground with high-tech labs. The rumors are that different alien species, from the Greys, from planet Serpo possibly, to the reptilians, are working hand in hand with the US government. As to what they're trying to accomplish, probably something really fun and good that we don't really need to bother worrying about. Stories about this place really started coming about from a man named Paul Benowitz, who claimed to have discovered an underground base near Dulce full of gray aliens and humans. His claims caught a lot of attention, but Benowitz's mental health eventually declined and he ended up in a mental hospital, passed away in 2003. And there's always been this rumor that he was part of a big, widespread misinformation campaign.
As I said, during EVA-1's time on Earth, he informed the US government of quite a few things. One being that Serpo natives, Ebans as they are referred to by humans, had actually been visiting Earth for the last 2,000 years with no issue. But But unfortunately, this time new Earth radar technology that they don't have on Serpo caused the ship to go haywire and crash, killing the majority of the crew. In 1949, a similar thing happened. 6 EBAs crash landed, but this time unfortunately none of them made it. When the ship was examined, the military found a communications device, which they worked on with EBA 1 to repair. They got it working and sent out multiple distress signals, but it wasn't until after EBA 1's death in 1952 that they finally got a reply. Communications began between the US military and the EBAs. It took a while, but eventually they were able to understand one another. After learning about the 12 deceased EBAs stranded on Earth, the EBAs asked if they could come to Earth and retrieve the bodies. Of course, the military wanted something in return, so they came up with the exchange program. The military wanted tech, but the EBAs said, no, you're not ready for our tech. And so they proposed something else. In exchange for the bodies of their deceased, 12 astronauts could spend a decade on planet Serpo. Furthermore, an EBAN would stay on Earth to assist the military. In 1964, the EBAs landed on Earth once again to retrieve the bodies, and Project Serpo, aka Project Crystal Night, as it has also been called, commenced.
Number 10. Recent sighting. Middletown was shaken by an extraordinary event last month as residents reported witnessing a display of rotating green lights hovering above them. The inexplicable sighting, which occurred around 10:30 p.m., left many in awe and pondering the possibility of extraterrestrial activity. One individual, Caden Little, managed to capture the event on video while on Jerry Couch Boulevard. Caden described his initial reaction as a mix of fear and fascination, exclaiming, "I instantly thought like we're under attack by aliens. It was scary." Fortunately, the lights abruptly disappeared without any hostile action, providing some relief. Eyewitnesses, including Bryce Garrick, observed the lights rotating in a clockwise motion before swiftly darting across the sky and vanishing. The bewildering speed at which the lights maneuvered ruled out the possibility of drones, according to Brian Simpson, president of the Cincinnati Astronomical Society. So what was it? Who knows, but my bet is aliens. Number 9. The coin incident. At 7:30 p.m. on October 18, 1973, American Airlines Flight 21 encountered a UFO near Mansfield, Ohio, and reported it. This would be the first of dozens of sightings reported in the area that night. However, the most astonishing one took place 3 hours later and became known as the coin incident. Sometime after 10:30 p.m., an Army Reserve helicopter piloted by Captain Lawrence Coyne and a crew of 3 men was flying from Columbus to Cleveland when, somewhere around Mansfield, they noticed a red light on the horizon. They then realized that the object was heading straight for them at a high rate of speed. Coyne quickly descended to avoid collision, but as the men were preparing for impact, the object came to a halt in front of them and projected a green, pyramid-shaped beam over the helicopter. At the same time this was happening, the men reported the helicopter being pulled up and towards the UFO. However, it then let go and darted out of sight. The incident lasted 5 minutes. The men described a gray, metallic-looking dome-shaped object with a red light on one end and white light on the other. Now, interestingly, after the incident, according to one crew member, the helicopter never worked right again. Now, this whole incident was seen from the ground by a mother and her 2 children who pulled their car over to watch what was going on. They reported seeing the helicopter chasing an object that they said looked like blimp, pear-shaped, and as big as a school bus. Number 8. Earliest photographs. A photo taken in St. Paris, Champaign County in 1932 is considered one of the earliest possible photographs of a UFO ever recorded. It shows George Sutton, a local resident, and what appears to be a classic UFO-shaped object over his left shoulder. Skeptics say the object is simply a street lamp, but according to the folklore that surrounds this image, there were no electric streetlights along this road in 1932, nor are any wires or poles visible in the image. Now, this photo is intriguing because it predates the flying saucer craze of the late 1940s and 50s. It was taken before the alleged Roswell UFO crash in 1947, and it was 6 years prior to the broadcast of the War of the Worlds in 1938, when some people believed aliens were attacking Earth. In other words, the person who took this photograph either captured a street lamp, a real UFO, or was way ahead of the curve in terms of pulling off a good hoax. But I'd like to think it's a real UFO. Number 7. The Carnival. As a way to raise money, Father Gregory Miller decided to host a carnival in August of 1949. The church sought help from Sergeant Donald R. Berger, and on the first night of the carnival, sometime after 8 p.m., he was operating the searchlight when it came upon a massive object in the sky. His log states the object was stationary, appearing as a glowing disc. When I moved the searchlight away, the disc continued to glow. He estimated the object to be around 25,000 feet high and reported that the sky was clear with a thin haze at altitude. More than 100 people saw the object that night, including Father Miller. Maybe nothing more would have come from this incident, but the next day, local newspapers carried stories about strange lights being reported all over Cincinnati, not just at the carnival. At least 3 major newspapers in the area ran stories about the sightings, so it definitely was something. Number 6. 86-mile police chase. In Portage Country in 1966, law enforcement officers from several jurisdictions either witnessed or chased a UFO for 86 miles into Pennsylvania. The incident is considered one of the most thoroughly documented UFO cases on record. Portage County Sheriff Deputy Dale Spar and second deputy named Wilbur Neff came upon the UFO around 5:30 a.m. on April 17th. They were investigating an abandoned vehicle and they heard a humming or buzzing noise behind them, and they turned to see a UFO hovering just above a nearby tree line. A bright cone-shaped light came from beneath the object, illuminating the ground. They called into dispatch, which told them to keep an eye on the object. Just then, the object began to quickly move away. The two decided to give chase, and near the state line, a local police officer saw the object, followed by Spar and Neff chasing it. He decided to join in on the action. However, a short time later, just as the sun was rising, Spar began to run out of gas, so he and Neff and the local police officer pulled into a gas station, where they watched the object ascend several thousand feet into the sky and then straight into outer space, and, well, that was that.
In 1975, a pilot and several passengers flying a private plane near Pine Gap's airspace saw something they would never forget. The facility had only started operating 5 years before. Everyone was wondering what the hell was really going on in there, and the passengers and crew were hoping they were going to see something while flying overhead, and see something they did. A large white object appeared, taking off from the base at an incredibly high speed. The object moved so fast that it was nearly impossible for the witnesses to get a good look at it before it vanished into the sky. The pilot, upon landing, reported the sighting. They were told to wait for investigators, and when these investigators arrived, they supposedly told the group to keep their mouths shut about what they'd seen and to forget the incident entirely. Obviously, not all of them did, and if there wasn't already heavy speculation and controversy about this facility amongst the Australian public before, there certainly was now. Now, what exactly is the Pine Gap facility? Sitting right in the middle of the outback, not too far from the remote town of Alice Springs, officially it's known as the Joint Defense Facility Pine Gap, and it's run by both the US and Australian governments. But what exactly goes on there? Like with any facility like this, there's the official answer and the more speculative ones. The facility is decked out with some serious tech. You know those big satellite dishes you see in movies? Pine Gap has plenty of them. They're used for all sorts of high-tech communication and surveillance activity. Officially, the facility is involved in intelligence gathering, satellite tracking, and missile detection. It's always been a controversial place though. It's seen a number of protests over the years, and many of them aren't even necessarily to do with the rumors and conspiracies, but they certainly don't help with its image. Pine Gap is rumored to be a secret site for advanced technology testing. Again, much like claims made about Area 51. A place where the military can try out their fancy new tech far away from the prying eyes of the public. And if you were gonna pick a spot for a test flight over your new advanced drone or aircraft, the Australian outback would be about as ideal as it gets. Ever seen Mad Max? Nothing out there but sand and kangaroos. I don't think there's actually any kangaroos in Mad Max, but you get my point. One of the main theories is that Pine Gap is involved in developing and testing advanced drones and aircraft. These drones could be used for anything from reconnaissance missions to lethal attacks. More on that next though. There are also rumors about Pine Gap being involved in cyber warfare testing, so developing new ways to protect against hacking or creating offensive strategies to mess with enemy computers. That's really the best way I can put it without doing a deep dive into exactly what hackers do on this kind of scale. I don't really know much about hacking other than the error messages I'd get that would screw up my janky old PC in the days of LimeWire. One of the biggest conspiracies is that Pine Gap is involved in operating spy satellites. I'd say a big part of this is the fact that it's jointly operated by the United States and Australia. It's partly run by the CIA, so that leads to some speculation for sure. It's rumored that Pine Gap plays a huge role in monitoring communications, radar, and other electronic signals from all over the world. The facility's remote location and the sophisticated tech make it a pretty ideal setup for controlling and receiving data from spy satellites orbiting Earth. There's a lot of speculation that Pine Gap works with various intelligence agencies to gather information on foreign military activity, enemy organizations, and just various global threats. I mean, this is barely even in the realm of conspiracy. It is a fact. It's involved in intelligence gathering, so I don't think spy satellites are really all that much of a stretch. It's really more of a question of, well, what exactly does this entail? Of course, they don't provide specifics because that would kind of defeat the purpose of the whole spying thing. Another one of the numerous conspiracy theories surrounding Pine Gap is its alleged role as an NSA or National Security Agency listening post. Edward Snowden famously brought this up, and it certainly makes the whole thing feel a lot more credible. According to the theory, Pine Gap is involved in surveillance and data collection, targeting domestic and international communications, using its advanced listening technology to intercept phone calls, your emails. Edward Snowden isn't the only guy to come out having said this, though. There are other whistleblower testimonies alleging that Pine Gap collaborates closely with the NSA to gather intelligence. Their claim is that the facility's ideal location and the powerful antennas make for intercepting large amounts of data, which is then processed and analyzed by intelligence analysts. Another intense rumor about Pine Gap is that it's involved in coordinating lethal drone strikes. Pine Gap is believed to have the tech and connections to control and direct drones used in targeted killings. So we already know they have the technology to efficiently gather intelligence and track targets, so once a target is identified, the data is sent to operators who can launch and guide drones to hit specific targets, often in remote or hard to reach areas. These drones can carry out precision strikes, taking out high-value targets with little to no risk to any human soldiers. The idea that Pine Gap could be involved in operations like this, again, stems from the fact that it's another hub for US intelligence and military agencies. So it's no secret that the US has used drones for targeted strikes in various parts of the world, and Pine Gap's advanced technology would be a major asset for this type of thing. Accusations about drone strikes have been denied, but I mean, of course, they're gonna deny something like that. Targeted drone strikes are probably the most controversial part of modern warfare. After one drone strike in July of 2013 in Pakistan, campaigners claimed the intelligence for the strike came from Pine Gap. There was a ton of outrage, and a number of human rights groups called for a UN inquiry into whether the Australian government could be seen as complicit in the strikes alongside the US military. There were even some allegations that Australian officials might have facilitated targeted killing, which would be against international law.
Starting off our list today, we have a 2018 UFO sighting that took place in the skies above North Carolina. Shout out to anyone watching from Elon University. In August of 2018, a man named Javion Hill claims to have spotted a UFO while driving home on US 74 just southwest of Charlotte. He described seeing lights in the clouds above him, shaped like a square. Immediately, he pulled out his phone and began snapping photos, which I have to admit are pretty convincing. After hovering in the sky above Javion for a good amount of time, the illuminated formation just vanished into thin air, as they do. You know how it is. It was as though it had never existed in the first place, but of course it did because there's proof, and we've seen it. And Hill, who says he was never a believer in aliens before that night, claims that during the time in which the object was hovering above him, he was seriously concerned for his safety.
On June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, saw something in the sky near Mount Rainier in Washington, something that he couldn't quite explain. He described 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation. What really caught his attention was how fast these things were moving, at around 1,700 miles per hour, which was faster than any known aircraft at the time. And when Arnold reported what he saw, it ended up getting massive media coverage. The Kenneth Arnold sighting is often referenced as the first big UFO encounter in modern times. After Arnold's sighting, lots of other reports started coming in about strange things in the sky across the United States. The government and military were getting intrigued, and the US Air Force started Project Sign, which was the first official government investigation into UFOs. This later became Project Blue Book, which looked into thousands of UFO sightings to try and figure out what was going on. So is it just one of these cases where he saw something and then everybody else started like getting excited and, just thought they were seeing things? Or was this just the time where UFOs and aliens were starting to come down to investigate things here on Earth?
Next up, we have two commercial pilots on different aircrafts claiming to have seen a mysterious flying object in the sky while flying above Arizona on February 24th of 2018. The first pilot to spot the UFO called into radio traffic control to ask if another plane had passed by him. The controller answered no, and then went on to make a joke about the pilot having possibly seen a UFO. Ground control then contacted another pilot flying an American Airlines flight a little bit behind the first plane and asked the pilot to inform the control center if an aircraft were to pass over the plane. And a short while later, the pilot did exactly that. He said that a fast object had flown 3,000 feet over his plane in the opposite direction of which he was going. Once again, ground control had no knowledge of the aircraft, and it didn't show up on any of the radars either. Both pilots later described the objects as illuminated and incredibly fast, saying that they were nothing like the weather balloons they had seen sometimes floating at that altitude before. Plus, there were no records of this object, so what could it have been? Well, a UFO, duh.
And we're going to start things off with Point Dume Underwater Base. So off the coast of Point Dume in Malibu, there seems to be this mysterious structure lying about 6 miles underwater. Images captured on Google Earth show an oval-shaped object resting on the seabed floor. Looks like it has a large flat top and what seems to be pillars or columns. Looking at it, it definitely looks like the entrance to something. It sits about 2,000 feet beneath the ocean surface, spanning nearly 3 miles in width, and some speculate that it could be more than just a naturally formed structure. And yes, some even think it could be an underwater alien base. Jimmy Church, who hosts a California-based radio show called Fade to Black, was pretty excited about the images, stating, "My first impression was that it was Greek. It looked artificial and didn't look natural. When you're looking at it from above, it's a nearly perfect oval shape. In the natural surroundings, nothing is symmetrical. Everything is eroded and covered in rocks and sloping and peaking. And right here, for 2 miles, it is a perfect oval with a black separation or outline to it. It just stands out that it has to be some type of roof. It's not unlike a domed stadium or a covered indoor racetrack or an Olympic arena. It's got that feel to it. It looks like a perfect oval man-made structure sitting on a construction site." Next up, we have the Solomon Islands UFOs. There have been some very strange things said to go on here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and not only have locals claimed to see strange lights in the sky, but also coming up from under the water as well, which has led to a pretty intense theory that there could be an underwater alien base there. There have always been local legends of monstrous giants on the islands, 10-foot tall, hairy creatures with flat noses and glowing red eyes. That, combined with the reports of strange lights in the sky, moving with incredible speed and agility, could mean there may be some kind of connection here. You see, some of these lights and strange flying objects have been seen descending down into the trees of the Guadalcanal or rising up from the ocean and zipping around before diving back down. There are also legends that these giants that are said to live on the island move around through subterranean tunnels. So some speculate that beneath the surface of the ocean is this hidden structure where extraterrestrial beings may be conducting their activities. Next up, we have Hy Brasil, a small mythological island off the coast of Ireland. According to Celtic folklore, this island is said to lie off the west coast of the country, appearing only every every 7 years, usually surrounded by mist. The island is often described as a paradise with advanced technology and a society living in total harmony with nature. Sailors and explorers have reported spotting the island for centuries, claiming to have seen strange creatures and these glowing god-like beings there. Maps from the 14th to the 19th centuries often included Hyperzil, but its exact location was always a bit of a mystery. Now, of course, it sounds like complete folklore, which Celtic culture is absolutely full of, but what if there's something else going on here? Well, some have suggested that the islands appearing and disappearing could have an extraterrestrial connection. The idea is that aliens could be using advanced cloaking technology or have a hidden base on or beneath the island, and the mysterious creatures that some sailors claimed to have seen on the island do sound like they could be alien-like, but it's still a total mystery as to what they'd be doing over there. At the time of this recording, NASA has just launched a craft the other day set to head to Jupiter's moon to discover if life exists there. On October 14th, NASA launched the Europa Clipper spacecraft on a mission to explore Jupiter's moon, Europa, which scientists believe might have conditions suitable for life. The spacecraft lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. This mission aims to investigate Europa's subsurface ocean, hidden beneath an ice shell that could be up to 25 kilometers thick. Europa is about a quarter of the size of Earth, but it's believed to contain twice as much water as all of Earth's oceans combined. This makes it one of the most promising locations for finding potential life out in space, at least that we know of. The Europa Clipper is the largest spacecraft ever built for a planetary mission. It's about 100 feet long, equipped with 9 scientific instruments designed to measure the internal ocean and analyze the composition of the moon's surface. The spacecraft will conduct 49 close flybys of Europa starting in 2031, getting as close as 15.5 miles to the surface. So unfortunately, we do have quite a while to wait before we hear anything, but the fact that NASA is actively seeking out life on a distant moon is pretty cool. Fingers crossed they find something. Just last year, NASA released a highly anticipated 36-page report on UFOs or UAPs, and there were some interesting takeaways. They looked into hundreds of sightings but concluded that they didn't find any solid evidence that aliens were behind any of them. Still, they didn't completely rule out the possibility either. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson made it clear that the agency is stepping up its game in researching these mysterious encounters. He said they'll be using better tech and artificial intelligence to dig deeper into them. The report is pretty technical, but one key takeaway is that it stated there is no reason to conclude extraterrestrial sources are responsible for these sightings. But the report also didn't deny the possibility of, quote, potential unknown alien technology operating in Earth's atmosphere. So that's pretty cool. Nicola Fox, who's part of NASA's Science Mission Directorate, said UAPs are still one of our planet's biggest mysteries. The challenge? A lot of the data they have just isn't good enough to draw any solid conclusions about what these sightings really are. To tackle this, NASA brought in a new director of UAP research, but they're keeping their identity a secret. This person will build a database to track and analyze future sightings, and using AI and machine learning. It's a smart move, especially since Dr. Daniel Evans mentioned that some members of the UAP panel had faced, quote, actual threats, which is unsettling. So keeping the new director's identity hidden is really about protecting their safety. The Falcon Lake incident began on May 20th, 1967 in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, Canada. This event is often been called Canada's best documented UFO case, and for good reason. It all started with Stephen McCallick, an industrial mechanic and amateur geologist. He was exploring the area in search of precious metals when he suddenly heard a commotion from a flock of geese, and he looked up to see 2 strange objects hovering about 150 feet away, which he described as cigarette-shaped things with humps in the middle, glowing with a reddish hue. One of the crafts then landed on a nearby rocky platform, transforming into a shiny disc that looked like, quote, hot stainless steel. McCallick sketched the craft for about a half an hour before deciding that he wanted to get a closer look. As he approached, he noticed it was completely smooth, but the craft had an open door where he could hear muffled voices. Then he reached out and
touched the craft, which was so hot it melted the fingertips of his gloves. As he turned to leave, understandably, a panel then opened up, releasing a blast of heated gas that knocked him back, setting his clothes on fire. McCulloch barely managed to escape, feeling nauseous and disoriented. He was so sick he was unable to eat solid food in the days following the incident, and was treated for burns that doctors said resembled radiation injuries. His story caught the attention of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and even US authorities. And when they reached the site that McCulloch said he spotted the craft, authorities found a 15-foot ring of burnt vegetation, and there were highly radioactive elements found in soil samples and in the clothing McCulloch had been wearing on the day of the encounter, which he had to rip off as they were on fire. And there was also superheated metal that had melted into the cracks of rocks, also highly radioactive. Till this day, the case has not been explained. This incident is referred to as South Africa's Roswell, the Kalahari crash. Kind of tells you how significant this one was. So the story goes that this whole incident was covered up. Some of the details of this one are a bit vague, and some chalk this up to being a hoax, but there were supposed leaked documents describing the following events. So this was an unusual event that took place over the Indian Ocean on May 7th, 1989. According to reports, a fast-moving object, believed to be a UFO, was spotted by naval personnel. In response, fighter jets were sent to intercept and target it. The UFO was successfully hit and crashed in the Kalahari Desert, leaving a noticeable skid mark. Shortly after the crash, a US recovery team was swiftly deployed to gather evidence from the site and transport it to Patterson Air Force Base. And not only were parts of the aircraft retrieved, but the bodies of 2 alien beings as well. The Tic Tac UFO incident is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the world of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. On November 14th of 2004, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, a pilot with the USS Nimitz, had an encounter during a training exercise off the coast of Southern California. Fravor was flying with Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich when they were directed to investigate an unusual radar signal detected by the USS Princeton, another ship in their strike group. The radar operators had spotted, quote, multiple anomalous aerial vehicles that descended from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. Fravor and Dietrich diverted to get a closer look, and as they approached, Fravor described seeing a small white object that looked almost like a Tic Tac, hovering above the ocean waves. He recalled in a 2021 interview that the object seemed to respond to their movements, as if it was aware that they were there. The Tic Tac was about the size of Fravor's jet, but had no visible markings, no wings or exhaust plumes. He attempted to cut it off, but the object accelerated away so quickly that it vanished from sight, only to be detected 60 miles away in less than a minute. Fravor stated, "I think what we experienced was well beyond the material science and the capabilities that we had at the time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years. This incident came out in a report revealing over 500 sightings since 2004, some of which, including this one, are still unexplained. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, often referred to as the Washington Flap, is one of the craziest UFO reports in history. Over 2 weekends in July of that year, people in the Capitol began reporting a series of strange sightings in the sky. On the night of July 19th, radar operators at Washington National Airport picked up a cluster of unknown objects flying at incredible speeds. Ground witnesses described seeing bright lights darting around erratically. The following night, the sightings continued, and the US Air Force sent up fighter jets to chase the mysterious objects. Pilots in the jets reported seeing glowing lights that seemed to defy the laws of physics, making sudden accelerations and sharp turns that no conventional aircraft could replicate. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was an investigator for Project Blue Book in the 50s. In 2013, during a citizen hearing on disclosure, he told a pretty wild story. While working for Project Blue Book, his job had often just involved debunking UFO sightings, but there was one incident that he had no explanation for. French recounted an incident had happened while he was investigating off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland. Reports had come in about 2 mysterious aircraft that supposedly crashed in the water. French followed a group of around 100 onlookers gathered on a nearby wharf What he saw next was something he'd never be able to forget. He described encountering 2 to 3 foot tall beings that were thin and gray, seemingly working on their damaged crafts in the water. French and the onlookers watched as these strange beings repaired their vessels right before his eyes. Then the craft lifted out of the water and shot off into the sky. He never included this sighting in his official reports at the time, probably fearing he'd be laughed out of his job. The Indian Ocean has a long history of mysterious sightings, with reports of strange underwater objects dating back as far as 1873. A number of sailors have described encounters with these massive, mile-wide discs lurking beneath the surface of the water, sometimes accompanied by eerie lights. One of the earliest documented sightings occurred on March 23, 1873, when the ship Adelheid was navigating the South China Sea. Crew members claimed to see this huge glowing circular object floating just below the water. And then May 15, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture spotted 2 enormous Ferris wheel type objects spinning in opposite directions. Each spoke about 25 feet wide and spaced about 100 feet apart. On April 14, 1901, sailors aboard the SS Kilwa reported beams of light shining from an underwater disc-like object in the Persian Gulf. Then in 1943, a sailor named Matthew Mangle noticed a massive glowing disc keeping pace with his ship. Next on the list, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This one is very well documented. It took place in December of 1980 near the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. Late at night on December 26th of 1980, military personnel witnessed strange lights descending into the forest. At first they figured it was just a downed aircraft, a known one. What they found definitely seemed to be an aircraft, just not one they'd ever seen before. They came across what seemed to be a metallic object on the forest floor and would see strange lights in the sky. Some reported that the object they saw was triangular and emitted strange beams of light. One of the airmen even claimed to have touched the object. There are official documents that have been released about this story with full reports by the military personnel at the site, and what they described was pretty strange. Now, did they actually encounter an alien spacecraft? It's debatable, but what is clear is that they saw something out of the ordinary. And finally, we have one of the most mysterious and destructive crash landings of all time, the Tunguska event. On June 30th, 1908, a massive blast hit this remote area of Russia. The event is believed to have been caused by the airburst of a large object of some kind, most likely a comet or asteroid, entering Earth's atmosphere and exploding in mid-air. The explosion released an enormous amount of energy and flattened about 80 million trees in the area. Now, luckily this happened in a very remote area, so only trees were affected, but that also means there were very few witnesses. A handful of people did report seeing a bright bluish light in the sky though, accompanied by a series of thunderous noises. And there's always been this question as to whether this was caused by a space rock or something else. Apparently there was also mutated plant life after this impact, and Joseph Stalin is rumored to have even conducted secret experiments in the area, but that's more of an urban legend. Next up on the list, we have strange skulls that were found in an underwater cave in Mexico. So in 2012, divers were exploring the cenote and the Yucatan Peninsula, where they came across 2 chambers full of human bones, and some of these bones were human skulls, but there was something off about them. They were elongated. Now, the ancient Maya were said to have performed human sacrifices in the area, and skull deformation was also practiced in various parts of Mexico way back when. There are theories as to why, but nothing entirely concrete. One idea is that high-ranking members of society had elongated skulls. Some say that people's skulls were elongated just to differentiate certain groups from one another, but there's also the theory that these skulls never belonged to human beings at all. Pretty common knowledge, of course, that there are tons of conspiracy theories surrounding the ancient Maya, including the presence of extraterrestrials that may have helped them construct all their intricate advanced cities. So could these skulls have belonged to these supposed alien beings? It's possible. Next up, we have the Lake Baikal incident. So this lake in southern Siberia is the world's largest freshwater
freshwater lake by volume. It's incredibly deep, and there are some pretty eerie stories about it. First of all, there's all the mysterious lights that are reported, not just hovering or flying above it, but also coming from the depths of the water. And there's a very creepy story that was supposedly an attempted cover-up by the Russian government. So in 1982, a team of Navy divers were doing a routine diving exercise in the lake when a number of them started spotting something pretty disturbing. There were all these figures deep under the water. They were tall and slender, well over 6 feet tall, and wearing what looked to be silver suits. Those suits could have also been silvery scales. They also had large, circular, glowing, unblinking eyes. The creatures began chasing after the divers, or swimming after them, rather, and the divers panicked and then swam back up to the surface, and they reported what they'd seen to their superiors, but that's where the story ends. The existence of the strange creatures has never been confirmed or denied. Next up, we have underwater alien bases in Alaska. So claims of alleged alien bases lurking beneath the waters off the coast of Alaska have been around for quite a while, but in recent years, the idea of them has become more of a popular thing, mostly thanks to Ancient Aliens. Thank you, Ancient Aliens. But apparently, there are even eyewitness accounts dating back several decades, which have been mostly undisclosed until recently. UFOologists and UFO enthusiasts have now been turning their attention to the mysterious activities in the waters of Alaska. One incident dates back to 1945, when crew members of a ship reported spotting an unidentified craft. Researchers, including members of MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network, which is a non-profit organization that studies reported UFO sightings, they think it's possible that extraterrestrial beings have been constructing bases beneath the ocean's surface, and that's because there are tons of reports of UFO movements over the water. There were also a number of UFO sightings in the 40s that weren't disclosed to the public at the time. These undisclosed reports allegedly provide evidence that there are extraterrestrial entities operating in the waters off the coast of Alaska. This next story comes to us from Reddit, and although what this person saw wasn't technically under the water, it was floating just above it, and it's a pretty fascinating account. The story comes to us from user Keslow, who writes, I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina back around 2006, and I had a job that had me leaving home at about 4 a.m. I lived in a bad part of town near the International Airport Joint Base, so when I left, I did a scan of the area before getting into my car. One morning, I stepped out of my home to do my scan and noticed that there were thin, wispy clouds flowing in off the ocean. Basically, it was a thin fog, about 1,000 to 1,500 feet up, moving like a river. I also noticed at this point that there were two effing moons. One is obscured by the thin clouds, our real moon, and the other is most definitely under the clouds. It was a sphere of glowing white light. It made no sound and did not move. After about 2 minutes, it bolted eastward towards the ocean. The glowing light faded quickly right as it took off as well. I've seen planes move near the speed of sound, and this thing went from 0 to like 3,000 miles per hour instantly. No acceleration. Much faster than the speed of sound with no sonic boom. I hope I don't see it again, especially on the water. I always wondered if it bolted because they saw me watching them. Next up, we have the strange reports of a large disc-like object being spotted in the Indian Ocean. Apparently, as far back as 1873, ships sailing the Indian Ocean from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea have reported spotting a massive mile-wide disc passing beneath their boats, accompanied by large, rotating lights. One of the earliest documented sightings happened on March 23rd of 1873, when the ship Adelaide traversed the South China Sea. Witnesses reported floating over a huge, glowing circular object beneath the ocean's surface. On May 15th, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture described the sighting of two large Ferris wheels spinning in opposite directions. The spokes of these wheels were reported to be 25 feet wide, with 100 feet of space between them. There have been tons of these reports in various
various locations in the Indian Ocean, over the years. On April 4th, 1901, for example, in the Persian Gulf, the crew of the SS Kilwa claimed to see rays of light emanating from an underwater disc-like object. And even in 1943, in the Persian Gulf, a sailor named Matthew Mangle reported a huge glowing disc beneath the water's surface pacing his ship. And these are just a handful of examples. And coming in at second place is the Michigan Stonehenge. So in 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology, Mark Hawley, made a pretty incredible discovery. It was this arrangement of stones lying on the lake bed, looking a lot like Stonehenge in England. The stones are laid out in a circular pattern, and some even appear to be arranged in a line. They're about 40 feet below the surface of the lake. So what was the purpose of this formation? Could it be the remnants of an ancient civilization? Could extraterrestrials have constructed it thousands of years ago? They look like they've been placed in a pretty precise pattern. Doesn't look to be natural forming to me. And of course, there's also a rock with a mastodon carved into it. Hard to believe something like that would be created naturally. What's also really fascinating is that these stones are believed to be about 9,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by about 4,000 years. And finally, it's only natural that we finish things off with what has to be the most famous strange object discovered deep beneath the sea, the Baltic Sea anomaly. So back in the summer of 2011, a team of Swedish treasure hunters didn't come across any treasure in terms of monetary gain anyway, but they did find something pretty cool, a sonar image that seems to show a strange UFO-like object on the sea floor. Peter Lindbergh, the leader of the treasure hunting team, would be so awesome just to be able to say you're the leader of a treasure hunting team. I could say that and I'd just be like digging through my backyard finding nothing. But this guy actually goes out on boats and submarines and does it. I didn't get that job. Anyway, he's the leader of Oceanic and was pretty astonished by what he had found, saying the object definitely didn't look like a natural formation. And even though a number of researchers have come out and said it probably is a natural formation, I still get excited looking at this thing. I don't know, I'm just not entirely convinced. I'm on the fence about this one. But what do you guys think? Alien craft, ancient artifact, just some mundane natural formation? Let us know down in them comments.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was the lead investigator of Project Blue Book in the 50s. His job was to investigate reports of UFOs and find any possible explanation for them. Of course, if there was none, it would be categorized as a genuine UFO. French had shot down a lot of UFO reports over the course of his career, but in 1952, he witnessed something himself, something he could only describe as a genuine alien encounter. He kept what he'd seen a secret for decades. It wasn't until 2013 that he testified before 6 former members of Congress in DC, describing an event that happened back in 1952. A number of residents off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland, had reported spotting 2 unidentified flying objects. So French was tasked with heading over to Canada to basically debunk it. The UFOs had crashed into the water, and when Lieutenant Colonel French arrived, he saw this crowd of about 100 people, including some police, standing by a wharf, gawking at something in the water. French made his way over, and when he looked down into the clear water below, he saw what looked like 2 large circular aircraft-like objects, and there were apparently 2 beings working on them. French described the creatures as, quote, 2 to 3 feet tall, light gray in color, very thin, long arms with either 2 or 3 fingers, the top of their heads much wider than their jawline. Their eyes were very slanted, and you couldn't see pupils in them. He then described the objects slowly rising out from the water before abruptly accelerating and taking off into the sky.
Next up, we have the very first record of a UFO encounter to take place in New England, USA, which I bet you didn't know was actually a major hotspot for extraterrestrial UFO and UAP activity. That's unidentified aerial phenomena, for those of you who don't know. The first recorded sighting happened in Boston, New England, and it was also the first ever documented sighting in the US as a whole. It took place in 1639, and credible reports have been popping up ever since. The record was a second-hand observation recorded by colony founder and governor at the time, John Winthrop, who wrote that a sober, discreet man had seen the sky above Boston become illuminated by a green light while he was rowing his boat along the river one evening. The light was still for a moment and appeared to be flaming, and then it morphed its shape and darted off into the night sky towards Charlestown. The encounter lasted for 3 hours, with the object in the sky going higher into the air and then rushing down closer to Earth again and again, back and forth. By the time it ended, which it did when the object just disappeared into the night, the man along with his boatmates had traveled 1 mile upstream with absolutely no memory of how they had gotten there.
This next one has to be the wildest alien encounter case in recent history. So in March of 2023, something strange went down in a small Bolivian village called Horania. It all started with reports of a mysterious green light hovering in the sky. People whipped out their phones to capture the event, having no idea what the hell they were looking at. But unlike a lot of your typical UFO cases, this one doesn't just end with people seeing something strange in the sky. Things get way weirder. So 2 days later, residents claimed to have seen tiny beings darting around the town at night. One villager, Rita Marquez, described them as little and almost like goblins. Some locals even claimed to have found one of these small creatures dead in a gutter one morning, only for its body to vanish soon after. So, a lot to unpack here. Strange lights, possible aircraft, little beings running around the streets at night, and even a mysterious disappearance of one of these dead creatures. I don't know what to make of this case. Whenever there's a whole bunch of witnesses like this, I find it very interesting though.
Next up, we have Barney and Betty Hill's extraterrestrial encounter, which took place on September 19th of 1961 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the couple claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The ordeal started when the pair saw a bright light in the sky around 10:30 p.m. while driving home after a night out. Betty asked Barney to stop the car so that they could get a better look. He did, and then pulled out a pair of binoculars. What they saw was a massive, oddly shaped spacecraft with multicolored lights. They tried to drive away, but the spaceship, which they believed to have been at least 40 feet long, followed them, getting closer and closer until it was hovering directly in front of the pair's car. Barney claims he was able to clearly make out 6 to 8 humanoid figures standing on the ship who instructed Barney and Betty not to move, but rather to just keep looking towards the ship. The next thing the pair remembered, they had driven 35 miles away from their destination with no recollection of doing so. They tried to write down as much as they could about the experience on their way home, but their memories quickly became fragmented. It wasn't until years later, under hypnosis, that the pair separately both recalled being taken onto the ship and then separated from one another and examined by the humanoid alien life forms. In the days after the incident, however, both Betty and Barney's watches stopped working, and Barney noticed tiny, circles on the back of his truck, and when he put his compass near them, it went haywire. So, I'm not saying they were telling the truth, but I think they might have been telling the truth.
This next story is very outlandish, but it's an entertaining story, and I haven't talked about it before, so here it goes. Back in 2021, Angelina Lynn Johnston held a news conference in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Johnston claims to be a former retired defense intelligence officer who had an encounter with various alien species at a secret base in the Mojave Desert. She claimed that in January of 2010, a few years before she ran as a Democrat candidate for South Dakota Senate, she had met up with a couple in South Carolina who ended up taking her to this secret base. She didn't provide details on exactly where the base was in the desert, but said that she would be taking an astronaut along with a few scientists to the base, which had been built into the side of a mountain. She described seeing various alien species, including one that looked a bit like a praying mantis type creature, and that the beings all spoke to her through telepathy.
Next up, we have the Exeter incident, which took place in Exeter, New Hampshire in 1965 and actually inspired a best-selling novel, Incident at Exeter: Unidentified Flying Objects Over America Now, by John G. Fuller. Not sponsored. One evening in Exeter, a police officer patrolling Highway Route 101 stopped to check on a woman parked on the side of the road. When he asked her what was wrong, she answered in breathless hysterics. She claimed that a large red flying object with flashing lights had been chasing her. Just a few hours later, the police heard a similar story from another man, a hitchhiker who claimed to have seen 5 bright lights in the sky while walking along Route 150. He told officers that they had been about 100 feet away from where he had stood, and he watched as they hovered over a home before moving over to the airspace above a large field, and then disappearing and reappearing several times. Curious, one of the policemen went with the hitchhiker back to the spot where he claimed to have seen the UFOs, and sure enough, there it was. And another officer arrived shortly after to see the exact same thing. 5 bright lights high up in the sky disappearing into and reappearing from the trees over and over again. And then, over the next few weeks, authorities in Exeter received almost 60 other reports of UFO sightings in the area. So, if you like aliens and UFOs and Exeter was not on your bucket list, you might want to rethink that decision.
Finally, we have a case where 3 UFOs hijacked a pilot's plane in midair. This is about as disturbing a close encounter as it gets, as this man just narrowly escaped death. The pilot's name is Carlos de los Santos. In 1975, he'd been flying back to Mexico City. It was just another routine flight until it wasn't. Carlos spotted something on his right wing. It was this silver disc-like object about 13 feet in length. It was just right on top of the wing. Then he saw an identical object on top of his left wing. And as if that wasn't enough, a third object appeared, and this one was heading straight for him. In a panic, Carlos tried to steer his plane away, but the controls weren't responding. Luckily, the object just missed him though. He frantically radioed air traffic control, explaining that he'd lost control and was surrounded by these strange disc objects. And then, to his complete and utter horror, the plane suddenly veered completely off course. It was now ascending higher and higher up into the sky. Carlos had absolutely no control over the plane now. But then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the strange objects flew away. And miraculously, thankfully, Carlos regained control of the aircraft. Now on to the stuff you've all been waiting for, of course, aliens and UFOs. Pine Gap has been a hotspot for conspiracy theories involving extraterrestrial research pretty much ever since it began operations. Some people are convinced that the facility is hiding evidence of alien life and is deeply involved in studying them and their technology. And this isn't just a situation of like, oh well, a big top secret government facility, gotta be aliens, right? No, there have been a lot of strange sightings in the area surrounding Pine Gap. Some people will even claim that Pine Gap is part of a global network of secret bases that collaborate on extraterrestrial research. Again, the American involvement certainly plays into this, so Pine Gap may be another facility like Area 51, according to the conspiracy anyway, where captured alien technology is reverse engineered. This could mean everything from developing new energy sources to building advanced propulsion systems similar to ones aliens could be using. There's also rumors that Pine Gap has underground facilities specifically designed for housing alien artifacts and possibly even extraterrestrial beings themselves. Let's get into some detail on a UFO sighting specifically, shall we? One of the most talked about encounters at Pine Gap happened early in the morning on December 22nd of 1989. So 3 men were heading home after an all-night hunting trip when something out of the ordinary caught their attention. It was around 4:30 a.m. when they noticed what looked like a door. It was camouflaged to blend into its surroundings. Suddenly it opened right in front of them, and from behind it there was a huge metallic gray disc. The disc moved slightly, hovering over the base for a few moments. The hunters stood there, frozen in shock, and watched as this disc shot upwards and then vanished into the sky. As they tried to process what they'd just seen, they saw the camouflage door slowly move back into place, sealing shut as if it had never been there.
Pine Gap employs around 1,000 people, and most of them live in the nearby town of Alice Springs. The workers are a mix of Australian and US intelligence personnel, but Alice Springs has a large American population, thanks to Pine Gap obviously, and visitors and townsfolk will often say, if you ask any of these Americans about their jobs, the common answer you'll get is that they're gardeners. It's apparently so common that it's become kind of an inside joke. Are all these people who say they're gardeners really gardeners, or could gardener be a cover for the real work these individuals do at the facility? Some people think that these so-called gardeners are involved in secretive operations at Pine Gap. Gardening, it's a pretty low-key profession, makes for a pretty convenient front for intelligence personnel who want to avoid drawing attention. At least that's what I'd say if everyone else hadn't picked that front too. I mean, you know, baker, carpenter, plenty of jobs to pick from, guys. Weather control. No, Pine Gap isn't even safe from accusations of weather control. This theory is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The idea is that the facility has the capability to manipulate weather patterns, using advanced technology to create or alter it. And maybe they have help from some of that alien technology they're reverse engineering. Again, even without the possible secret alien technology hidden inside, people see the sophisticated equipment combined with the secretive nature of the facility, and questions start to form in people's heads like, could they be playing God and screwing with the weather? Could they be using methods like cloud seeding or even more advanced techniques, creating rain and drought-stricken areas? That would be nice. Or maybe they're working on ways to weaponize the weather. The concept of weather control isn't entirely far-fetched either. Various governments have been known to have explored weather modification in the past.
Number 5. October 11th, 1973. October 11th was quite the night for Ohio residents, as there were many UFOs spotted. In Dayton, at least 15 sightings were reported. Many witnesses reported seeing objects covered with red, green, and blue lights hovering over treetops in the area. A Montgomery County Sheriff's deputy reported seeing an oblong object covered with lights that appeared stationary in the sky at treetop level for several minutes until he tried to shine his cruiser's spotlight on it. It then zoomed towards him and then shot straight up in the sky. Then in Troy, according to an article in the Columbus Dispatch from October 12, 1973, titled UFO Reports Proceed Boom, on October 11th, Troy patrolman Early Thomas and about 100 Troy residents said they watched a hovering red, green, and white object move across the southeastern sky. Now, just to note, this happens to be the direction of Wright-Patterson. About 15 minutes later, law enforcement agencies in Miami, Champaign, and Logan counties received hundreds of telephone calls after a sonic boom was heard. They received more calls when a second sonic boom was heard just after midnight, and it seems like the aliens had something special planned for that day to me. Number 4. Trumbull County UFO Incident. Featured on the History Channel and numerous UFO documentaries, the Trumbull County UFO incident in northeast Ohio is exceptional because it was witnessed by numerous police officers and a 911 dispatcher, all of whom were being recorded as they spoke back and forth about the strange events unfolding the evening of December 14th, 1994. It was also seen by many members of the public as well. Now, around midnight, Trumbull County 911 began receiving calls from residents about strange low-flying lights in the sky. The dispatcher sent out Liberty Townsend police officers to investigate. One of them was Sergeant Toby Melrose, who saw a light. He got out of his car and looked up to see what he described as a giant circular-shaped object and intensely bright in the center section. It made no sound at all. The object was there for about 30 seconds before moving away. Shaken, Sergeant Melrose decided to chase the object, as did many other police officers in the area. At least 14 law enforcement officers saw the object that night, with all of them discussing it openly on their radios. Number 3. 1973. There were many UFO sightings in 1973 in Ohio and its surrounding states. For example, in Columbus on September 30th, a Franklin County man claims to have discovered a landing site near his home after seeing a strange object in the sky. Weeds at the alleged site are crushed to the ground in a semi-oval area 20 by 30 feet wide. The man says the object whooped down in a zigzag pattern and dropped below the trees. There are several dozen sightings of strange objects in the sky reported in the area that night. Then in Middletown on October 7th, a giant orange-colored cigar-shaped object with 5 discs following it and making no sound is reported flying over the city at 10 p.m. Many people see it, and Wright-Patterson receives numerous calls. Now, these are just 2 examples of that year, but there are many, many more. Number 2. 2. Circleville. On August 26, 2022, Pete Hartinger said UFOs were spotted in the area. An expert on the topic who has seen a UFO with his own eyes, Pete said several people reported seeing UFOs between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., including a man who saw something in the sky as he was traveling on US 23 north of Circleville. He saw strange lights, and going on down, he saw some more strange lights. He knows some other people who saw them too, he said. The man said it wasn't right the way the lights were acting. The lights came down, hit the ground, and went back up, so forget about them being flares. Pete said the man, who wishes to remain anonymous, reported what he saw to the Roundtown UFO Society, a local group dedicated to studying these matters. Anybody who has seen strange, mysterious lights that have been in the sky, please let us know, he said. He said at least half a dozen people saw the lights. One person said they saw orange lights over the fairgrounds, he said, and another person said he saw some military aircraft coming in after he saw those lights. Were they coming in to investigate, or what? Since 1947, there have been several sightings of UFOs in the Circleville area, which is strange. And coming in at number 1 is Ohio is a beacon. According to the Mutual UFO Network of Ohio, MUFON, the state ranks among the top 10 states in UFO reports. Thomas Wortman with the MUFON said, "It's all sorts of things we get. We get the individual who is out walking their dog at night who reports seeing unusual lights that they just can't explain. They see the lights for a few seconds or minutes and they just want an answer." Now, the majority of these reports come from Northeast Ohio, and Thomas says about 80% of what comes in the agency can be explained, but about 20% and up being classified as UFOs. Now, if you're waiting for the government to admit that aliens do exist, don't hold your breath, because the Time reports that the Pentagon isn't going to say that. But my question is, what is so special about Ohio?
The star system where these aliens are supposedly from has been at the center of some of the most famous alien abduction stories in history, including the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Were these beings from Serpo, Ebens, or Greys, as they're typically called, responsible for abductions like this? The Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty interesting. In September of 1961, this American couple was driving through rural New Hampshire at night when they noticed strange lights in the sky that seemed to be tracking their car's movements. Barney decided to stop the car to get out and have a look, and what he allegedly saw were humanoid figures peering out from a hovering craft. The Hills peeled off as fast as they could, but they later realized they'd lost a pretty hefty chunk of time that they just didn't remember. But as the days passed, they started to remember things. They ended up reporting being taken aboard a UFO where they were subjected to medical examinations by beings described as small, with gray skin, oversized eyes, and tiny little anime mouths, which is that's the exact way they described it back then. It's a 60s term, anime mouths. Their account was one of the earliest descriptions of the now iconic image of your classic gray alien.
Of course, a regular mission to space is no walk in the park, but a mission to a faraway planet located in a star system entirely separate from our own, that's tough. And apparently so was the training process. It took an entire year of survival, escape, evasions, weapons, and psychological training for the 12 astronauts to become fully prepared for their mission. The crew consisted of scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. Over the course of a year, along with the standard training, one by one, each member of the crew was buried in a 6 by 5 foot box and kept there for 5 days as part of a training intensive. There was no light, no communication. Just a small air hole that allowed the astronauts to receive food and water and not suffocate to death. It was tough, but they all passed, and the pilots even went on to learn how to operate alien spacecrafts. When it came time to take off, the 12 astronauts, along with 40 tons of gear, which included 10 motorcycles and 3 jeeps, were loaded into the spacecraft using anti-gravity technology, and one even came along to assist in their journey. When the ship was all boarded, each astronaut went to their own individual pod and settled in for the long journey ahead.
All right, before we get to what they saw on that journey, let's have a little bit of fun here and talk about something that comes up more than you'd probably think when Project Serpo or just interactions between aliens and humans is discussed. Hybrids. Yeah, aliens creating human-alien hybrids, either through experimentation or, God forbid, actually getting it on. This kind of thing always feels like it's going down the same rabbit hole that creepy online fan fiction does, where it's like, I'm gonna write about my fantasy of Alf impregnating Willie Tanner. I don't know. I'm not trying to shame, live your lives, but the concept of humans and aliens breeding with each other always feels inherently silly to me. With that said though, this does often play into the Project Serpo conspiracy. Those astronauts were apparently on this planet for a while. Who knows who they met? One thing could have led to another. Plus, in all these reported UFO abduction cases, who knows what kind of nasty experiments those Greys could have been doing.
When the crew arrived at Serpo, the first thing they noticed was that it was barren, bright, and hot. Really hot. About 107 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Quickly, they realized why. Planet Serpo had 2 suns, which are shown here in a photograph taken by one of the astronauts. Allegedly. One of the suns was orbited by Serpo, and the other was off in the distance. Because of this, the planet never got dark, and the days were 40 hours long, meaning that their decade-long mission was actually going to take 13 human years. In total, there are about 650,000 Ebens living on the planet in small, separate village communities and houses made of some kind of concrete rubber substance. It was a primitive life, but at the same time, the Ebens were equipped with electricity and incredibly advanced technology. Families generally consisted of a male and female Eben, and each family was allowed to have a maximum of 2 children, which were hidden away until they reached the age of maturity. During their time on Serpo, the astronauts gathered as much information about the Ebens as they could. And if you guys remember, I do believe I mentioned that one of the astronauts died on transit. Apparently the Ebens used that astronaut to clone and create hybrids of, like James mentioned. And it was then that the remaining astronauts realized that they weren't as peaceful as they once thought them to be. When it came time to return home, for some reason, 2 of the astronauts actually decided to stay, and then 2 more astronauts died on the way back to Earth. The surviving astronauts were given a large sum of money and an entirely new identity. That's great and all, but many of them were suffering from radiation poisoning due to the 2 suns and died soon after their return to Earth.
One of the most avid supporters of the Project Serpo conspiracy is a man named Richard Doughty, who we can't really talk about Serpo without talking about this guy. See, Richard Doughty has made some pretty outlandish claims, so outlandish that there's a whole other conspiracy that spawned around him and other government officials like him. Supposedly, Doughty was the man behind those anonymous emails I talked about earlier. Richard Doughty is a retired special agent who used to work for AFOSI, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. But a lot of people think he wasn't actually investigating UFOs, but that he was part of a team spreading misinformation intentionally, basically muddying the waters and leaking supposedly secret info about the government's exchange program with alien beings in order to confuse the public, making it hard for us to tell what's real or not. Of course, the purpose behind the misinformation is, of course, to distract everyone from the actual nefarious things the government is up to. I mean, who doesn't get excited about aliens, right? I'm sure we'd all rather believe that the worst thing the government is doing is working with extraterrestrials instead of them doing some shady stuff at our own expense. Could there be some genuine truth about the planet Serpo thing? I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, just something to keep in mind with stuff like this.
If you believe in Ebens, I really want to know.
Please let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts.
Yeah, we're not judging, we're just so curious.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll catch you in the next video.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about mysterious creatures that defy explanation. Scientists are working tirelessly to find out what these creatures are. Hopefully we can get more information as time goes, but watch the video for yourself to see these animals firsthand. What are you waiting for? Click the video now.